I am so delighted to be here, so delighted to be on your campus, so delighted to have the history that we've had with my oldest son, Anthony, being a graduate of the school and having two grandsons here. I am particularly grateful for the Divinity School, since that is a large part of my work and my life, and I am honored to be here. When I wrote my study Bible and Bible commentary, at the bottom of it, it says, advancing God's kingdom agenda. It is my contention that the Bible only has one theme. It is expressed in a multiplicity of ways, but the one theme is the glory of God through the advancement of his kingdom. That the kingdom is the only subject in the Bible, and that every story, every doctrine, every personality, every biography is in one way or another designed to advance God's kingdom. Both the Hebrew and the Greek word for kingdom has to do with rule and authority. And so the rule of God in history, and there's a lot that goes behind this, of course, there's a whole theological system tied into this, but to summarize it, God's rule is God's goal in history to be fully realized at the return of Christ in eternity, or in the millennial kingdom and in eternity. The failure of the church, in my view, to understand and advance a kingdom theme rather than merely an ecclesiological theme, that is a church-centered theme, has given great detriment to the church's effectiveness in the culture. We've been more church-oriented than kingdom-oriented, when really the church is supposed to be the nursery of the kingdom. It's a place where the values and concepts of the kingdom. I'm going to talk about one specific area in a moment, but I do want to set the stage. The first time the word church is used in the Bible is in Matthew 16, verse 18, when Jesus said, I will build my church. The Greek word there is ekklesia, meaning called out ones. Now, generally, when we define that, we're talking about people who got saved. But the word goes a lot deeper than that. If you look at chapter 19 of the book of Acts, verses 38 to 41, ecclesia is used twice, but not referring to Christianity. It's referring to the enemies of Christianity. Yet the word for church is used, and it's translated in most versions assembly, and it's used of people who were legislating against the church. Yet the word church is used, because the word ecclesia was used of a legislative body that could legislate, city council, Congress, that kind of thing. Jesus says, I will build my church, and he uses that word. The church, in addition to worship and fellowship and all the things that we assign with church, is God's legislative body in history. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It legislates from heaven to history, like an embassy. An American embassy is located in every identified country in the world. An embassy is a little bit of America a long way from home. It's where the values of America have been situated in a foreign land. The embassies are always sovereign territory. They do not belong to the country they're in, they belong to the country they're from. So what the church is supposed to be is an embassy on earth representing the rules of heaven. So we legislate on foreign territory based on the information from the homeland. But because the church has gotten more cultural than kingdom, it legislates from the culture rather than from the kingdom, which then makes the church a Benedict Arnold in history. It begins to work against the program. He says, I will build my church. Okay, and then it says, the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. To use football language, the church is supposed to be on offense, not defense. I'm building the church. The gates of hell are trying to stop me. We spend our time trying to stop hell when it should be the opposite. We should be so dynamic. Hell is trying to stop us. It says the gates. The word gates is used in the Bible of a legislative body. The Old Testament, the elders sat at the gates to legislate. So that's a legal term when the Bible talks about church, not just a spiritual term, although it includes that. The important verse is verse 19, where it says, and I will give you the keys to the kingdom. He uses keys plural because in verse 18, he uses the word gates plural. So for every hellish gate, there is a kingdom key. And the kingdom key is designed to unlock a door in heaven to address a gate from hell. And the way you know the key is working and unlocking the door is I will give you the keys to the kingdom, because the church exists for the kingdom, not for the church. I will give you the keys to the kingdom. And whatsoever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatsoever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Permitting or forbidding, which is binding and loosing, it has to deal with authority. So the church has been given the keys of the kingdom to exercise heaven's authority in history. So that when God wants to do something in history, here's the key point, he checks with the church first. Ephesians chapter 3, verse 10, that the wisdom of God may be made known through the church to the principalities and powers. So the principalities and powers, both in the spiritual and the physical sphere, have to flow through the church first. And therefore, what happens in history is directly tied to what the church is or is not doing as far as God's rule or kingdom is concerned. So those two need to be tied tightly together. The church does not exist for the church exists for the kingdom. Now, having said that, we are to now look at the issues we face and kingdomize them, that is, get heaven's viewpoint. The church then is to execute what the kingdom has stated. One of the ways that the church has not executed kingdom thinking is in the area of race. If the church in America had taken a different posture, we wouldn't be dealing with the George Floyd situations today. Because what the church did was it endorsed what the culture accepted, rather than reject what the culture accepted because it was expedient to do so. Out of that has come not only slavery, the repercussions of slavery, criminal leasing, peonage, debt servitude, Jim Crow, and all the other idiosyncrasies, redlining, you name it, that have fostered the racial climate that we're in today. Because this issue was never addressed, it could have been solved simply with Exodus 21:16, which says that you could not kidnap anybody and hold them hostage. Well, if you applied that, then slavery would have died, and because it was tied to a kidnapping, and then it would have ended. We must understand that the church was the strongest entity, including in schools when we first started, the Harvards and the Yales, was the strongest entity of influence in American culture because of the Judeo-Christian worldview. But that influence was not wielded in the area of biblical justice related to race. Now, a whole lot of things we can go into there. But to make it more contemporary, this issue has now taken on academic focus. And the academic focus that is the most controversial today is critical race theory. Critical race theory is kind of defined all over the place. I use the illustration of a firecracker. If you shoot a firecracker up in the sky, then it explodes, then you got lights all over the place from one thing that has exploded. Critical race theory has exploded, and now it has all these nuances that are all over the place. So some people, many people can't even define it because it's all over the place, and people are arguing back and forth about it. At the heart of critical race theory, going back to the original authors of it in the late 1980s, Derek Bell, the Harvard professor, critical race theory is centered around law. And what it is saying is that there was a legal structure in America, and that legal structure infiltrated every aspect of America, governmentally approved, so that all areas of American life have been contaminated by racism. So critical race theory says that the law infiltrated the structures. The structures have been contaminated so that even though the laws changed, the contamination remained. So the laws, the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act 64, Voting Rights Act 65, all those changed the laws, but it didn't change the virus. And that the virus of racism still exists. So a large part of critical race theory is tied to what is called systemic racism, or the abiding effects of laws, even when the laws have changed. Let me give you an illustration that I use that's relevant to our church in Dallas. Our church in Dallas sits against the backdrop of a golf course, 150-acre golf course. When we first moved in the area where our church is located, African Americans were not allowed to play in the golf course. It used to be white. It was now a changing community. As African Americans came to this community, the golf course initially, no blacks were allowed, but now the laws were changing. But they didn't want African Americans on the course, even though it's now adjacent to a growing African American community. So what they did was they came up with a system. And the system was anybody who wanted to join the golf course had to be recommended by an existing member. So you had to be recommended. So if an Anglo person recommended me to join the golf course, okay, the problem is 2/3 of the members had to agree with the person that you recommended. So even if an Anglo person recommended an African American person, they would never get in because they would not get 2/3 of the vote. So while the law was no longer there, the system was still in place. Yeah. And the system achieved what the law achieved, only it wasn't done legally, it was done as a system. Now, the person who recommended me could have easily argued, well, I am not a racist. And maybe they weren't a racist, but they were tied to a system where it didn't matter because the system was set up so that African Americans, now, to make a long story short, we now own the golf course, so that's what So, but I'm
what's
saying,
your handicap?
I don't play golf, I just buy them.
You just
So that is a practical illustration of it.
good.
But it has shown up. It's shown up, the history of 1845, Southern Baptist Convention, and I know they've repented of it and all of that. But some of the systems were still at work, even though the laws have changed and all that. So that is still real. Critical race theory seeks to achieve that. Now, it's exploded, okay? One of the big explosions occurred with Hannah Jones and the 1619 Project. The 1619 Project said that America really didn't start in 1776. It started in 1619 in Jamestown, Virginia, when the first slaves were brought to America. And that the Revolutionary War was not merely fought to free the colonies from British rule, it was also fought to preserve slavery. And so that's the 1619 Project. Well, the 1619 Project has gotten conflated now with critical race theory, so that now even people who are against the 1619 Project are against critical race theory because the two have gotten conflated. So that's just one illustration of a number of kinds of attachments that have come. But I've tried to give you a core understanding that's tied to law of critical race theory. The problem is that the Church of Jesus Christ, which is supposed to be bringing the kingdom and its worldview into the culture, has been so errant in regard to this that it's not offered a clear word. First of all, let me establish something. Color blindness should not be our goal. God is not colorblind. The Bible talks about race. In my book on race, Oneness Embraced, I talk about the Black presence in the Bible. You can go through the Bible and Black people can find great Black pride in the Bible because of all the figures that are held in high esteem. And we can go through that, but in the Bible, Jesus has African in his blood. From the ladies that are listed in his genealogy, who were from the line of Ham and Canaan. So that Ham means dark or burnt. He was the black son of Noah. That's a whole another melanin discussion, but that's in scripture. And so there's a Black presence. So there is enough in the Bible for everybody to find their racial pride. Not only that, but in Revelation chapter 5, verse 9, 7, verse 9, John says he looked into heaven and he saw people from every nation, every tribe, every kindred, and every tongue. Right. But he said he saw them. So there were visual differences in glory. So whatever race you are now will be the same race you are in heaven. So stop trying to flip it, okay? God is not colorblind, okay? Now,
good.
okay? But God is not blinded by color. He's not colorblind, but he doesn't want us to be blinded by color. And that is what has happened. So what I have proposed, and what he was talking about the booklet, my book on race, Oneness Embraced, is a comprehensive study on unity. Let me say this as I get into that. Unity is a big deal. And it's a big deal because of the character of God. One God composed of three co-equal persons who is one in essence while distinct in personality. So the Father is not the Son is not the Spirit, but it's like a pretzel with three holes. The first hole is not the second hole is not the third hole, but they all tie together by the same dough, okay? They all have divine nature. So God is unified, okay? So whenever there is illegitimate disunity, not, sin and false doctrine, we're to be disunified. But whenever there's illegitimate disunity, God backs up. And that's in a family. He says in 1 Peter 3:7, if the husband is in conflict with the wife, that his prayers will be hindered. Yet it says in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 5, if the husband and wife are in agreement, God will show up. So the unity. So Satan creates this unity because he knows God will back up because it's against his character. That's why Ephesians chapter 4, verse 3 says, preserve the unity of the Spirit at all costs if you want God to be involved. That's why in John chapter 17, verses 23 and 24, he says, preserve them in unity so that they might see my glory. Yeah. In other words, you won't see his glory if you're illegitimate, disunified. So it has been in Satan's interest to keep the church divided so he can keep God away. And if you have illegitimate disunity, it doesn't matter how much you pray, how much you fast, how much you have kumbaya meetings. If there's illegitimate disunity, the glory of God, which is his manifest presence, will not be made visible. And so that is why, one major reason why we're not seeing today the move of God in the culture, because he can't even get the move of God in the church. Because the church has been more church-minded than kingdom-minded. So the book, Oneness Embraced, which is this comprehensive thing of unity, a lot has happened in our culture with the police shootings, the George Floyd, the political division that has divided us along political lines and all that. So I'm updating the book, Oneness Embraced. And in updating the book, I have a section now that I call Kingdom Race Theology. Instead of CRT, it's KRT. And I'm bringing the kingdom concept into the issue of race because the kingdom concept fits into every issue. There's no issue outside of the kingdom because God is the comprehensive ruler, heaven and earth, all things. Okay, I love Ephesians chapter 1, verses 22 and 23. Jesus is head over all, but he's only been given to the church. So only the church has access to him. But he's he's ruler over all. And we are the fullness of him who fills all in all, Ephesians 1 says, 23. In other words, we complete Christ. He's the head, but we're the body. What does the body do? It implements whatever the brain says. So we are the implementers of the head, which is Christ. So if we are not if the brain is saying one thing and the body is doing something else, we are a body that's not in sync with the head in a lot of issues, but particularly the issue of race. So what I've done is I've included now an update where I talk about kingdom race theology. I talk about, its history and all of that. But then I get to this chapter called Kingdom Race Theology. And in this chapter, I take the kingdom concept and I'll define it and I call it the kingdom agenda, which is the visible manifestation of the comprehensive rule of God over every area of life. The visible manifestation of the comprehensive rule of God over every area of life. I'll introduce another word as I wind down here. I'm taking 20 hours and trying to get it in 20 minutes. So excuse me for talking fast.
Doing good.
But Paul deals with the racial issue quite a bit. Of course, the biblical racial issue, cultural issue, religious issue were Jews and Gentiles. That's where the conflict existed. Okay? And so Paul talks about the grace of God in Ephesians chapter 2. And he talks about we're saved by grace, he says, and he says in the ages to come that God may reveal his grace. Says in verse 8 and 9, by grace are you saved through faith, out of yourselves. It is a gift of God, not according to works, so that no man should boast. So he's spending the first 9 verses talking about grace. He comes in verse 10 and he says, well, we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which he has created beforehand that we should walk in them. So he says, grace has created work. And when he says grace has created work, the first work he goes into is the issue of race, beginning in chapter 2, verse 11 through the end of the chapter. So he goes from grace to race. And in from grace to race, he brings up the Jew and Gentile division. And over again, this racial division, he keeps using the word one, one new man, one body. He keeps using the word one, and then he keeps using the word peace. I think it's 4 times in that chapter. He talks about the peace. Then he talked about fellow saints. So he uses all these unity concepts in that chapter. When he discusses it from the vantage point of the cross, what the cross did. Now, at this point, I've got to insert something. I want to say a word about the gospel because he goes into the cross of Christ. There is the content of the gospel and the scope of the gospel. The content of the gospel is the good news about the death and resurrection of Christ, and that faith alone in his finished work forgives sins and gives you the gift of eternal life. The content of the gospel is narrow, but the scope of the gospel is broad. The word gospel, the euangelion, is used not only of salvation, but is used of sanctification. Yeah. And when you understand that Jesus came in Luke 4 to preach good news to them afar, he said, I come to tell the poor, I've come to tell the incarcerated, those who are captive, good news. I want to give them all good news. Now, what evangelicalism did was spiritualize it. Good news for heaven. But he concludes it with, he said, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. Well, the acceptable year of the Lord is Leviticus 25. And Leviticus 25 is the year of Jubilee. And in the year of Jubilee, wasn't just spiritual. It started with the Day of Atonement, but slaves were set free. Debt was canceled. Family restoration took place. In other words, there was social stability with the euangelion that Jesus talked about in Luke 4 when he refers back to Leviticus 25, and the year of Jubilee brought order in society. So the gospel is to take people to heaven, but it's to bring order into history. And when he talks about that in Ephesians chapter 2, he says the cross, and then he uses 2 words. Early in the chapter, he says, but God. But now, I think it's verse 13, he starts it off with, but now. But now. Kingdom Race Theology says that the cross of Jesus Christ is designed to create something new in spite of what happened with something old. The reason we can't get rid of this racial crisis is we spend so much time rehearsing the old, we never get around to building the new. He says, but now. I know y'all got a bad history. I know you got bad background. I know Jews and Gentiles fight with one another. But now. And then he brings up reconciliation. Let me say a closing word about reconciliation. Kingdom Race Theology says that the Bible is sufficient to deal with injustice and is sufficient. We don't have to go to secular theories to fix the church. But if the church would be involved intentionally in reconciliation is taking those who are divided and bringing them together again. Now, how do you do that? Well, let me suggest something. You reconcile through service, not through seminars. You can have all seminars all day and talk about racial reconciliation and unity and oneness, and that's great instruction. But you serve together. When you are in a war, you don't care about the color, class, or culture of the man fighting next to you as long as he's shooting in the same direction you are. So you reconcile because you have a common enemy. You have a common thing you're shooting at, common thing you're going at. So it is in mutual service that we reconcile. And when you can get people across racial lines, and so we have a whole strategy, that'll be in a booklet too, of the church reconciling. So Kingdom Race Theology says, but now we're going to spend more time on talking about where we're going, learning. We're going to spend more time in the windshield than the rearview mirror. We're going to use the rearview mirror because we want to learn from yesterday, but we're going to live in the windshield because we headed somewhere. And so to talk about where we're headed and not just rehearse where we've been, although we want to learn from it, is the goal of Kingdom Race Theology.
Wow. Honestly, what I asked him to do, I knew he was capable of, and what he just shared with us in really a short period of time. You know that what we're discussing is something that has to be unpacked, but it has something to admonish us towards right now, very practically. And so I don't want us to get lost in the nuances of this, and that's part of what we're going to do here. I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask some questions. But there is something, so many of us, in fact, he described it this morning. A lot of times we like the huddle, and right now this is one of those huddles. And so my desire and my burden of this room this morning is that we leave here on this campus, okay, to see impact and change on this campus. Everyone in here is responsible for what you're hearing here today, including this dean of the School of Divinity, and including every faculty member, every student. We're all responsible for interacting with what God is teaching us in these moments to then put it into action. I'm not going to define what that means. I think you will know. If you are students and believers, sons and daughters of the King, who will pursue him and let him speak to you and then follow through in obedience, what we want to do. Thank you, Dr. Evans, so much for this. So I'm going to start us just with a quick question. You know, you described systemic racism and that reality that is in our culture now. Are there any theological, lines that we see throughout Scripture that emulate, or maybe systemic racism has emulated some of the struggle that we have? I'm thinking Tree of Life or Tree of Law, the book of the law versus the Tree of Life mentality in the kingdom. And do you find that believers are getting swept along theologically, who we are, in a systemic system, or I guess that's redundant, similar to what we were describing there with systemic racism, where we've experienced freedom, we're still finding ourselves in this system?
Well, we are, and we don't normally apply it to this, but it is a form of worldliness.
Yeah.
Worldliness is a system. It is that system headed by Satan that leaves God out. And because that system is so dominating upon us, and because we live in it, we work in it, we're raised in it, we adopt ways of thinking that the system of the world fosters on us.
Right.
And, that can happen parentally, it can happen through schools. And so what the church is supposed to be infiltrating that with the system of the kingdom. But because the world has so grafted us, you take Galatians 2. Here, Peter is a super Jew, okay? If Peter was a soul singer, his favorite song would be "Say It Loud, I'm Jew and I'm Proud." Peter was the Jew's Jew. So he's eating, in verse 11 of Galatians 2, pork chops with the Gentiles, okay? Because he finally found he could eat pig. So now that this super Jew can now eat pig because of what happened on the rooftop with God sending down all the food, he is sitting and eating with the Gentiles until his Jewish brethren show up. When his Jewish brethren show up, he now extricates himself from the Gentiles because of the system he grew up in.
Wow.
He grew up in that system, and now when his people, his race showed up, he said, well, I don't want to lose my favor with my race, so I'm going to leave my other brothers and sisters in Christ to satisfy my cultural norms and standards. Mm-hmm. He was being drawn by a system.
Right.
Now, how was that fixed? Paul showed up for some chitlins or pig feet too, okay? And Paul said, when I saw what Peter did, I corrected him before them all. See, what we need to know is a mist in the pulpit leads to a fog in the pew.
Wow.
And when pastors don't teach the whole counsel of God and dance around this and not in love speak to this, Paul spoke directly to it, and here's what he says. He tells Peter, you have embarrassed the gospel. Well, Peter's already saved. He's already on his way to heaven. But Paul uses the word gospel because you have embarrassed the application of the message of the cross in terms of human relationships. And that's when he quotes Galatians 2:20. Most people quote Galatians 2:20 and don't remember Paul is quoting that to Peter.
Right.
He's telling Peter, you need to go back to your real identity. We need to tell Christians, your real identity is your identity with Christ. Your humanity must adjust to that, no matter how you were raised, or the system will own you.
Yeah, that's good. Oh, that's powerful. But yet it's also very simple. There isn't a lot of complication there. We have one line, one lineage, ultimately, and that is to our Heavenly Father, as we are being shaped to become in the image in Romans 8:29 that He is shaping us in the image of His Son.
Absolutely. You take John 4, Jesus is talking to the Samaritan woman. Okay, she said the Jews don't deal with the Samaritans. We got a racial divide that's been going on here since 722 BC. It's going on years. Jesus, in 2 hours, because the end of the story says, and Jesus stayed with them 2 days. So the end of the story is he winds up spending the weekend with folk who don't even talk talk to one another, and he does it in 2 hours. Why? Because when you add kingdom approach to spiritual truth, you don't need 245 years to fix it.
Wow.
You fix it because you become definitive immediately.
Wow, that's powerful. That's so powerful. You just mentioned John 4. By the way, the first time I ever heard you speak was right here at Old Thomas Road, October of 1987.
Wow, that's impressive. That's why you're the dean, because that's good.
It was Dr. Falwell's original super conference that we used to have on an annual basis. Yeah. And you had the 8:15 a.m. slot. And I was on the front row, right in front on the organ side, and with two or three buddies. I mean, we were sitting there drinking this in. John 4 had never been explained to me the way it is. And the way you laid that out really connects with what we're talking about here, because you used that to dial towards community transformation that leads to global transformation, but it dialed back to family transformation, which begins with individual transformation. And so that it just is. So I just wanted to throw that caveat in there. I was listening. This young guy was taking notes. Okay, so Mama didn't have to come out of the choir and sit with me on that one. So, but I'm going to give you guys some opportunity. I don't want to burn all of our time, because I honestly could just let you watch and let us talk, because there's so much I want to just glean from Dr. Evans. But if you wish, you can go to one of those mics. We'll get to as many questions as possible. Please keep it to one question and as succinct as possible. So I'll let anybody want to stand up and have a question you want to ask. Can we skip the awkward moment? You hit the mic, because it's been recorded. So this is Dre. This is my friend from the Tidewater area up here in Hampton. So
my question would be, has anyone, like a brother from you, asked you why you serve a white man's religion, and how do you respond to that? Because I have like family members who would say that, and I have an answer, but it's kind of like, I want to hear your opinion on that.
Well, I would say, in light of what they're talking about, is you're talking about the misuse of religion by whites. You're not talking about biblical religion. And so then I would take them to the Bible, and I would say that what you're reacting to, how people have misused the Bible for their social, economic, or racial gain. You're not talking about the Jesus of the Bible, who did just the opposite than what his bad representatives are illustrating to you. So I would condemn the misuse and not get caught up in them turning biblical Christianity into white Christianity. And the more you know about the black presence in the Bible, the more you can argue that we can defend Jesus, we can defend the Bible as black people because of the black presence in the Bible.
It's good. Somebody else. You can line up at the mics. Thank you, Amina.
Hi, my name is Amina. First, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to sit with us and unpack this. It's very valuable information, I think, for all of us in this room. My question is, how do you address believers who are complacent and indifferent in this area, and can kind of, explain all of this to them, and they're like, well, I'm not a part of the problem, or I don't really see like what the issue really is, even if you explain that to them. How do you move believers to a place of movement, compassion, away from indifference and complacency?
Very good question. Well, first of all, 9/11 destroyed the Twin Towers. There are twin towers in the Bible that always are juxtaposition each other: righteousness and justice. Psalm 89:14, from his throne comes righteousness and justice. The white church historically has emphasized righteousness to the rejection or to the ignoring of justice issues. So strictly from a biblical issue, our discussion about justice should get as much time as our discussion about righteousness. But because that's not been taught and all that, so first of all, just becoming biblically literate about the prominence of justice in the Bible. And that the justice issue always is tied to you doing things that help to rectify the repercussions of injustice. So when a person says, what should we do? The issue is not only that I am not a racist, is what are you doing against racism? Whether it's in your school, whether it's in your family, whether it's in your, church. So it's inaction that frustrates people who argue that that's not them when they haven't done anything against the evil. Whereas if it was a righteousness issue, they would talk about it. What should we do about it? They would protest about it. Jerry Falwell's great contribution to the Christian community when he did the moral majority was predominantly against abortion. Abortion was the linchpin issue that he was known fighting against. And that's legitimate, life in the womb. But the biblical approach is also life to the tomb. So it's womb to tomb, and between womb to tomb is dignity. James chapter 3, verse 9, we should not denounce people because they were created in the image of God. So the Imago Dei, the image of God, argues for the dignity, but you don't hear that preached. So when people hear, yeah, I'm going to support life in the womb, but I'm going to support dignity and justice to the tomb, and I'll join you, but I need you to join me, so we have a whole life agenda, not term.
Somebody else.
Hi, my name is Victoria. And my question is, in culture today, we see a lot of just the world kind of fighting kind of at the front lines of a lot of the issues that we see, whether it be like last year, like everything with Black Lives Matter or just different racial issues. How do we as Christians, especially young people that are going to go out in the culture in like a few months, I mean, I graduate in like 9 months, so I'll be in it, or I guess I'm in it now, but how do we kind of draw the line between wanting to get involved and want to help fight the issue that we see, but also like staying grounded in what the truth of the Bible says? Because there are so many organizations and individuals that are anti-racism, but like their morals and values just like don't reflect that of Christ.
Well, absolutely. We do not extract righteousness from justice. We do not extract justice from righteousness. The two have to walk side by side. Let's take Black Lives Matter, since you brought it up, which is one of the iterations that plug into critical race theory. You have to discriminate. There's Black Lives Matter, the movement, and there's Black Lives Matter, the organization. The problem is they both use the same term. And if you don't know which one you're dealing with, you can get swept up into things we don't believe in as Christians, because the organization is horrific in terms of non-biblical values, okay? But the movement that Black Lives Matter is no different than the movement that the life of the unborn matters. It's just segmenting an area of life that you want to focus on. So what we have to do is clearly make distinctions. We must say, here's what we agree with because here's what God agrees with. Here's what we disagree with because this is what God disagrees with. So I will legitimately protest, and the Bible does allow legitimate protest. Acts chapter 16, Paul protested illegitimate incarceration because he was a Roman citizen. He did the first sit-in the Bible. He says, I protest that. So legitimate protest, peaceful protest, because in Romans chapter 2 condemns rioting. So you have legitimate protest that takes place. And this is how far I will go, but I can go no further. Now, when you do that, you have to understand that's where suffering with Christ comes in. Because I get churches that I won't go along with because they're crossing the biblical line in light of something that's legitimate. But if you're going to cross that line, I can't go with you because of my commitment to Christ. Now, I can go with you up to this line. I can't go with you over that line. But if you're going to amalgamate those lines, I can't go with you at all. So then I'm going to identify with someone or some group that shares my biblical worldview up to this line. The problem we have is that Billy Graham, I was up with Billy Graham a number of years ago, and I was up at his home, and he says he was having a crusade in Atlanta. He says, they got a real problem. I said, what's the problem? He said, the churches will come together for evangelism, winning people to Christ, but after I leave, they will not relate to each other again. And I said, Dr. Graham, the problem you have is that they will cross over here for evangelism, but the white church won't cross back over for justice issues. And so there is a hypocrisy when you're not doing both, so they don't have a relationship. Because they agree with evangelism, they'll do that. but there's no relationship on the other. So what we need churches to do is to come together in communities where they're fighting for both. The life of the unborn, the life of those who are born, and the justice and the dignity that goes with that. And when we do that, then we can begin to see changes in our community and in our churches. So we got to discriminate, and you're going to suffer repercussions because there are churches who get mad at me, preachers who get mad at me because I'm not going along with all that program of protest. So then you're suffering for Christ at that point. But you have to be willing to do that because we can't compromise our biblical stand for cultural conformity.
That's good. That's good. Thank you, Victoria. Somebody else. I saw somebody else stand up right there.
I wanted to ask, do you think the innocent origins of CRT is disconnected from Karl Marx's conflict theory and then Frankfurt School's critical
theory? Yeah. They're not disconnected because most of the promoters of critical race theory come from a Marxist frame of reference. And so because they come from a Marxist frame of reference, their reference is errant, but not all of their content is. And see, sometimes what we do is we say, well, because they're coming from this frame of reference, we'll throw out the baby with the bathwater. But you can't throw out the historical realities of what has happened in this country and the ramifications of generational repercussions. The ability to have generational wealth in this room is a lot different for whites than it is for blacks, because the generational opportunities for generational wealth were not there because of discrimination and racism. So those are real issues, even if it's coming from a communist or a Marxist. So you are right in identifying from the Frankfurt School, from critical theory, and then critical social theory that led to critical race theory, all of those Marxist idiosyncrasies and iterations that develop. We need to condemn those because of their anti-biblical and God stance, while not dismissing the systemic realities of racism. See, I did a little talk on socialism versus capitalism as well, and the socialism construct is often bred out of a desire for equity, another big controversial term, in society, okay? But that construct denies biblical freedom. So we got to make that distinction from what the Bible has to say without rejecting some of their legitimate points about what law has done in infiltrating the systems of our society.
That's good.
Thanks so much.
That's good. Some of what he just referenced too, as far as the content, when he talked about socialism versus capitalism, there are audio files through Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship. You can go check those out. I've listened to them. My wife and I and our family have listened to a couple of those. It's been a great educational endeavor, but as well calibrating back to just kingdom ideas and gospel truth. So I would encourage you to do that.
One of the things I have in the book that you'll see is I list what white Christians can do and what black Christians can do, and then I did what the church can do. I want to say this, particularly to my white brothers and sisters here. You never, ever acquiesce to the accusation, to being accused of being a racist to satisfy a political agenda. In other words, that word racism is being applied to everything now, and everybody now, and it's become whiteness, a social construct. Okay, you should be proud of what God has made you, as long as you do not let that pride lead to an unbiblical response. So don't be made to feel illegitimately guilty. Okay, because that can be a power move on the other side. Blacks can use the acquisition of whiteness, white privilege, and that acquisition for more black power. And see, and when blacks do that, that is as wrong as whites using whiteness for white power. So we've got to be biblical on both sides of this fence if we want God to be involved.
Sounds like some Ephesians 2 biblical theology coming out right
Yeah,
there.
a little bit.
So, yeah, Michael, come on up.
There he is. I know that young man.
Not good. So my question is this: you talked about how the church stepped back from the sphere of social influence in some ways and allowed the world to dictate the conversation, dictate the ways that there were solutions applied. And a lot of times when we think about the church speaking up or the church standing up, that comes with a negative connotation. That comes with a picketing of, abortion clinics or yelling at people that God hates them, things like that. So how do we as a church, how do we be vocal? How do we raise our voice for justice, for righteousness at the same time without falling into, I guess, some of the pitfalls that the church has run into in the past?
Well, the thing that should dominate all of our conversation is love. The biblical definition of love is the decision to compassionately, righteously, and responsibly seek the well-being of another. So love starts with a decision, not an emotion. And when we're doing that, the people who we are seeking to show that to ought to know that that's why we're doing it. Right. And if that motivation doesn't come through, we fail with our actions.
Let's go back over to the left here.
Thank you so much for your obedience to the Spirit and coming here and sharing your heart that God's given you with this. It's given me a lot more understanding than I did when I came in here today. Most of my life, I grew up kind of in ignorance of the system of racism, kind of left by racist laws in the past, that even though those laws have changed, the system's still there. And this whole thing isn't much help if I don't see the system. So help me, how can I start to see the system that's been left by these laws?
Well, one of the things, if you choose to do, is read some of those who are in their writings condemning the ongoing repercussions of that. When Derek Bell wrote his book, so I can give you, and I may even have it in the booklet that you get, some readings that you can do where you can see the systems, or also people who have been affected by it, okay? For example, I'll give you one other thing. When I first started in radio, no radio station would allow me to be on because they said a black speaker would offend too many of our white listeners. So that was a system, okay? They would all declare they were racist, but the system didn't allow for a black voice on radio. The only reason I got on radio from a human standpoint is James Dobson, a Focus on the Family, wrote a letter to the radio stations, and he ran interference, which opened up the door that I had to take advantage of, but it opened up the door for a white to assist an African American to create opportunity that a system would not allow. So talking to people who have been affected by the system is another way. So reading and interacting, and that's why you've got to cross-pollinate here. Mm-hmm. You've got to talk about your history and your background and how those differences, because this is a great laboratory for that. Because you have people who come from different backgrounds here and can share what their experiences have been, and so that it's sitting right in front of you in dialogue, conversation, and interaction.
Thank you.
Great, that's great. Let's go back over here, Blake.
All right, thank you so much for covering today. Anything you said really good, pretty spot on. I don't know, mine's a little off topic. It's not about race, but I'm running 2 Bible studies right now, and I've been watching you and what you're saying. I just want to know, what are some of the things you do when you speak to millions of people? What are some of the things you do every time you speak to effectively communicate and effectively connect with the audience?
Well, you want to do a couple of things. You want to answer the question clearly, what does God say? Okay, that's being biblical. But then you want to answer the question, where are the people that I'm talking to? The Bible was not written as a systematic theology. It was written as a biblical theology. So you got 66 books written over 1,500 years by 40 different authors because they were written to specific people at specific times going through specific things. In other words, the Bible was written relevantly. Systematic theology organizes it, and you don't often see the relevance because it's structuring what the Bible teaches on a certain subject. But when you're thinking biblically, then you want to not only answer what does the Bible say, but what do the people need? And when you answer the question, what do they need? So when I'm preparing a speech, I will, in my mind, often pretend that there's a housewife here and a student here and a parent here and a businessman there. And based on what this passage is saying, What do they need to know relative to the world in which they live? And when you answer the question of the audience from the Bible, you become a relevant communicator of spiritual truth.
Thank you so much, sir.
It's good. It's good. We got two more.
Awesome. My name is Elijah, and I'm Dr. Evans. It's a huge honor to have you come speak. And I've loved your ministry and listened to a lot of your and your family's ministry for a very long time. But you mentioned the white responsibilities of the Christian and the black responsibilities of the Christian in the church. But as a mixed kid growing up and seeing not only both sides, but growing up with other friends who are mixed, we are like a smaller percentage, but we are growing. What would you say is a good way for us to help not only build a unity between both responsibilities in the church, but like what should our responsibilities as mixed kids who've grown up seeing both cultures and raised in both cultures, how should we help each side with their responsibilities as, with our own as well?
So you got built-in reconciliation. You got built-in reconciliation. Because as you said, you've had to live in two worlds. And there are biblical characters who had to live in two worlds. The thing that brings two worlds together is truth. Truth is an absolute standard by which reality is measured. So truth does not deny culture, but what truth does is inform it. So therefore, one of the things God gives us is freedom to be what we were created to be within biblical guidelines. So he's not asking black people to become white or white people to become black. He's asking both to become biblical.
Yeah.
So when you bring a biblical worldview to the distinctions within culture and color, then you've got some glue that can bring those two together. When you, a person like you who has to live in two worlds, see, if you're African American fully, you have to live in two worlds because you're raised black, but you have to live in a white world because the systems of our culture are predominantly in that category, okay? Whites don't have to live in a black world. They can go to all white school, in an all white community, go to all white church. They don't have to. Blacks have to because the jobs, the employment, all the systems. So these things are approached differently. But a person who has to live or chooses to live in both worlds, because there's some mixed people who only identify with whites, some mixed who only identify with blacks. But I see you got the hair, so I know you're identifying with blacks. You got the stuff. See, so but people who don't have to, or who do identify with both, you don't deny that. You use it.
Yeah.
You use it because you have to speak two languages. You have to relate to two realities. And if you're thinking yourself to be, which all Christians should be, a reconciler, because 2 Corinthians 5 says he's given us all the ministry of reconciliation. Right. Everybody should be involved in grace that leads to race. Then you must look at yourself as having been given the unique privilege and opportunity to lead the way in harmonizing the races because you bear both.
So good. So good. Elijah, real quick. God is not surprised that you are in that situation. So he's not surprised. It didn't deviate from his design for your life. And so you can take exactly what he just said, and that gives you great courage, boldness in the truth that God has designed you for this. Yeah. All right, last one.
All right, so I have a question for my dad, actually. He's a history teacher.
So did your dad go to college?
He went here, actually. He's an alum from here.
He's an alum from here. That's great.
That's great.
He wants to know, as Christians, what should our response be to those who oppose to critical race theory being taught in schools across the country?
Well, that's a great question because schools are dividing over this. Well, first of all, the problem is sometimes they're rebelling against the iteration of it than the origin of it. And so because they go Black Lives Matter, 1619 Pride, all that's just thrown into this bucket now. So that's the problem. So first of all, anything that is illegitimately divisive needs to be held suspect, either because of the origin or the iteration. And because in almost all these situations, people are reacting to the iteration of it, and the iterations are primarily divisive. What you do is you extract from it the legitimacy. See, they want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So now you get a reaction from the other side because there is real history here that can't be ignored. So the question on the floor should be, okay, let's all agree to teach real history and its repercussions in the social and racial and political structure of American life. Because nobody's going to disagree with history, but because it's gotten all wound up in this other stuff, people don't hear that. So my answer to your father's question is, that's why I did with Kingdom Race Theology, let's come up with a new plan. You can't beat something with nothing. So simply saying get rid of it with nothing being offered puts us on the defense. Let's offer something and then let them react to what we're offering, not just what we're disagreeing against.
That's good. It's very good. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for those questions. Those questions are phenomenal. I am proud of our students here at Liberty. And I want to affirm you in this endeavor, not just to be here for what you'll be able to gather from just someone who God has used for a long haul. Okay, so he's been a part of following and pursuing and leading in the church for decades. I do want to say he was introduced by Pastor Falwell, our campus pastor, this morning as the first Black graduate from Dallas Theological Seminary's Doctor of Theology program. And what many of you don't know, we don't have a degree like that anymore. Not only was it a lot of work, I'm guessing.
You're guessing right.
Quite a bit. It was a long time of work that I think totaled about 140 hours of credits. So, and I'm not talking about quarter hour. I'm talking about full deal credits. So, not only was the struggle real in the culture, but the actual work that went in there. I could back out the reality that he's the first graduate from there. Just the fact that he graduated with that degree, I hold him in high esteem. So, and David knows what I'm talking about.
Can I say something?
Yes, sir.
Just a quick moment. Just using that as an illustration, I was the fourth African-American student to go to Dallas Seminary. If I would have tried to get in there a couple of years earlier, they wouldn't have let me in.
Yeah.
Because they were not accepting Black students. They had acquiesced to the culture. And yet that was known as the best Bible teaching seminary in the world. But I wouldn't have been able to get in if I'd applied a few years earlier. Yeah. So while people can say, okay, you're the first Black to get a doctorate from Dallas Seminary, that's a compliment and a condemnation.
Sure is.
Okay?
Sure is. Thank you for that. I got some words of encouragement from one of our Divinity Advisory Board members just this morning. That he's continuing to pray for our institution. He's an alumnus church planner in Boston. And these are the words I'll leave with you as we wrap up here, and then I'll close in prayer. But do not grow weary in well-doing.
Yeah, great word.
For we will reap in due season if we faint not. And we're in a season where that you should feel that on a daily basis. But I encourage and admonish you, if we do not grow weary in well-doing, we will reap in due season if we faint not. And Isaiah testifies, the only way we...
Thank you for joining us on this spiritual journey. If this message touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to stay connected with more reflections that nourish the soul. Your presence here means so much. Come back soon. And let's continue to explore faith and meaning together.
Don't grow faint is that we wait upon the Lord. And so that's my...
Thank you for joining us on this spiritual journey. If this message touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to stay connected with more reflections that nourish the soul. Your presence here means so much. Come back soon. And let's continue to explore faith and meaning together.
Word for us as we exit today. Thank you, Dr. Evans, for being here.
It's an honor. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Great